The Oklahoma sun was a hammer beating down on the cracked earth. It was the kind of heat that made the world shimmer and distort, turning the vast, unforgiving landscape into a mirage. For 100 miles in every direction, the world was a palette of rust and faded green, punctuated by the occasional lone oak tree or the skeletal remains of a forgotten farmstead. Ethan, a man whose face was a map of hard-won battles and weary hope, felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. His truck, a beat-up Ford with more rust than paint, smelled of stale coffee and the countless miles he'd put on it in service of the Wildlife Foundation. He was a veteran of the rescue circuit, his body and spirit scarred by a decade of pulling animals from situations born of human ignorance and cruelty. But some calls, some silent pleas for help, still made the hair on his arms stand up. This was one of them. The anonymous tip had been a single cryptic sentence. "Large cat in a shed, looks sick." It was a whisper in the wind, but it was enough. Ethan had spent days cross-referencing property records, mapping out the most likely location, and finally getting a warrant that was little more than a flimsy piece of paper in the face of what he knew he would find. He pulled to a stop by a rusting metal gate that hung precariously on its hinges. A dilapidated farmhouse sat hunched on a patch of dead grass, its windows like vacant staring eyes. The air was thick with the scent of dry dust, diesel, and something else, a musky animal odor so potent and foul it made his stomach clench. He walked up the gravel path, his boots crunching under the relentless sun. The owner, a man named Lyle, was waiting on the porch, a coiled spring of defiance and fear. He was a man worn thin by poor choices, a ghost haunting his own property. Ethan had no patience for the excuses he knew were coming. "You the government fella?" Lyle grunted, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a greasy hand. "I'm with the Wildlife Foundation," Ethan corrected, his voice calm but firm, a stark contrast to the boiling heat. "I'm here about the animal." Lyle's eyes darted past Ethan, a flicker of panic in their depths. "He's just fine, doesn't cause no trouble." He gestured vaguely towards a large corrugated metal shed behind the house, a dark, rusting box that seemed to soak up the sun's heat and radiate malice. Ethan ignored the man's pathetic attempts at deflection and walked past him, his steps deliberate and purposeful. The closer he got, the stronger the stench became, a miasma of uncleaned waste and primal fear. It was a smell that spoke of neglect and suffering, of an existence without sunlight or dignity. As he approached the shed door, a low rumble, deep and guttural, vibrated through the ground. It was a sound that commanded respect, a sound born of a wild, untamable spirit. But here, in this suffocating box of metal and concrete, it was a cry of desperation. Peeking through a crack in the warped door, Ethan saw him, a male Bengal tiger. He was a magnificent creature in a broken way, a symphony of sinew and muscle reduced to a broken melody. He was pacing a concrete enclosure, barely bigger than a large dog kennel, his movements repetitive and frantic, a physical manifestation of his mental torment. His fur was matted and dull, his stripes faded by filth and shadow. But it was his eyes that truly captured the tragedy. They were a piercing, haunted green, filled with a terrifying mix of fury and fear. Every muscle in his body was coiled, a spring ready to snap. He was a shadow, a ghost of what he should have been, a king in a cage of his own making. As Ethan watched, the tiger met his gaze and let out a full-throated growl that rattled the shed door, a visceral sound that was less a warning and more a promise. This tiger was not going to be saved easily. He was a testament to the fact that wildness, when caged, can curdle into a poison of the soul. Ethan felt the weight of the rescue on his shoulders, not just of a physical animal, but of a shattered spirit. If you love stories of hope and transformation, be sure to subscribe to our channel. This story is a fictional dramatization based on realistic scenarios. Ethan didn't try to force it. He knew better. A decade of rescues had taught him that approaching an animal like this with aggression or haste would only end in disaster. After that first encounter, he drove back to his truck and spent 2 full days just sitting. He set up a folding chair a safe distance from the shed, in the sparse shade of a lone, gnarled oak tree. He wasn't there to rescue the tiger. He was there to be a consistent, non-threatening presence. Lyle, the owner, grumbled and complained, but Ethan's legal paperwork, a thick packet of official seals and signatures, was too intimidating for the man to argue with. Ethan spent his days in a quiet, lonely vigil. He would read from a book, the low murmur of his voice a constant in the tiger's world of silence and fear. He started referring to him as Raja, a name he felt suited the animal's powerful, though broken, spirit. It was a quiet rebellion against the anonymity of his suffering. "It's not so bad out here, Raja," he'd say, his voice soft, a low hum in the oppressive heat. "The sun feels good, the air is clean, you'll see." The tiger remained a ghost. He would pace relentlessly, a hypnotic back and forth that spoke of an endless torment, or lie motionless in the darkness of the shed, a shadow within a shadow. He would still let out a low growl any time Ethan's shadow got too close to the shed door. But a week into his vigil, something shifted. Ethan was eating a stale sandwich, the sound of the dry bread crunching loud in the silence, when he noticed a slight movement from the shed. Raja was watching him. There was a stillness in his movements that wasn't there before, a momentary pause in the endless cycle of his pacing. Ethan didn't react. He just kept eating, his movements slow and deliberate, a quiet declaration of his harmlessness. A local neighbor, a kind-faced older man named Frank, came over with a thermos of coffee, his old pickup rattling down the dusty track. He'd seen Ethan for days and was curious, but his curiosity was tinged with a deep, rural empathy. "Never liked that guy, Lyle," Frank said, his voice a gravelly whisper gesturing to the house. "He's always been a trouble magnet. Found out he had something dangerous back there. Never saw it, but I heard it. Poor thing. You think he's okay?" "He's been through a lot," Ethan replied, sipping the strong black coffee, "but he's still here, and I'm still here." Frank nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the weight of Ethan's commitment. He told Ethan stories of Lyle's neglect, of a tiger cub that was purchased on a whim and left to rot in the shed. It was a story as old as time, a fable of human greed and an animal's suffering. Another week passed. Ethan knew the time was right for the next step. He got a long piece of PVC pipe and taped a small piece of raw meat to the end. The smell of the meat, rich and tempting, filled the air. He slowly extended the pipe towards the cage. Raja, for the first time, didn't immediately growl. He watched the meat with an intense, almost hypnotic focus, his head tilted. He took a tentative step forward, his ears swiveling, trying to make sense of this strange new offering. Then another. He moved with a cautious grace, a predator's instinct warring with a lifetime of distrust. He snatched the meat with a sharp, swift movement and retreated to the back of the shed. But he didn't growl. It was a tiny victory, a single flickering candle of hope in the suffocating darkness of the shed. For Ethan, it was a massive step, the first fragile thread of connection. The day of the rescue was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Ethan had spent the past month on the phone, a constant, weary negotiator between state officials and the Florida sanctuary. The sanctuary, a sprawling non-profit haven for exotic animals, was a place of true refuge, a stark contrast to the dusty hell of Lyle's shed. The plan was meticulous. They had secured the necessary permits, the funds for a specialized transport, and a team of expert veterinarians. The air was heavy with tension, a humid heat that clung to every surface. Lyle was gone, having signed over the animal under duress from the authorities and with a threat of legal action. The team of 6, all dressed in tan uniforms and serious expressions, surrounded the shed. A large, steel-reinforced transport crate, custom-built for a tiger, sat waiting. Ethan's heart pounded a rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of anxiety and hope. He gave the signal. The lead vet, a woman with steady hands and a calm demeanor, raised the tranquilizer gun. The quiet thwump of the dart hitting Raja's hindquarter was the sound that changed everything. The tiger, roaring in shock and pain, charged the walls of his enclosure, a frenzy of brute force and primal fear. It was a terrifying display of raw power, a desperate cry of a soul pushed past its breaking point. It took several long, agonizing minutes for the sedative to take effect. When Raja finally slumped to the concrete floor, his massive body a dead weight, the team moved quickly but carefully. It took 6 men to carefully maneuver the unconscious animal into the transport crate. The sheer size and weight of him were staggering. They used ropes and a stretcher, their grunts of effort a low chorus. The heavy, rhythmic breathing of the sedated tiger was the only sound besides the grunts of the men. Ethan watched, his hands clenched into fists, a knot of worry in his gut. This was the easy part. The real challenge was what came next, the journey and the long road to recovery. The long drive to Florida was a test of endurance. Ethan drove in the lead truck, with the precious cargo following close behind. The landscape changed slowly, the flat plains of Oklahoma giving way to the swampy, verdant green of the deep south. Ethan stayed awake, fueled by caffeine and a relentless sense of purpose, checking on Raja periodically. He found himself talking to the unconscious tiger, whispering promises of a better life. "Hang in there, big guy," he murmured, his hand resting on the metal bars of the crate. "It's all going to change now." Upon arrival, the sanctuary was a beautiful, sprawling testament to second chances. They wheeled the crate to a large, grassy enclosure with natural shade, a small stream and tall native trees. The air, thick with the scent of pine and rich earth, was a world away from the stale air of the shed. When Raja finally began to stir, Ethan was there, watching from a distance. The tiger awoke in a daze, stumbled out of the crate, and as his eyes focused on the vast, unfamiliar space, let out a deep, terrified growl. He immediately retreated to the far corner, his body language communicating pure fear and distrust. He was a prisoner still, a captive in his own mind. Ethan felt a pang of despair. The journey was over, but the true work was just beginning. Thank you for watching this story. For more videos about amazing rescues and incredible transformations, please consider subscribing. Remember, this is a work of fiction. The initial weeks and months at the sanctuary were a test of patience for everyone. Raja remained a ghost, a shadow in the corner of his vast new enclosure. He ate, but only after the sun had set and the sanctuary staff had gone. He drank from the stream, but only under the cover of darkness. He ignored the toys, the logs, the natural enrichment items placed carefully in his space. His mind was a prison, a fortress of fear built from years of neglect and abuse. Ethan, his temporary mission now a long-term commitment, stayed on, working with the sanctuary staff, his focus entirely on the tiger he had saved. He continued his routine. Every morning he would sit by the enclosure, but now with a professional team behind him. Dr. Anya Sharma, the sanctuary's lead vet, was a specialist in animal trauma and rehabilitation. She was a woman of quiet strength and profound empathy, and she became Ethan's lifeline. She would monitor Raja, providing advice and emotional grounding for Ethan when his hope began to wane. "It's trauma, Ethan," she'd explained one day, her voice calm and scientific, yet laced with compassion. "He's been conditioned to fear everything. He doesn't know what to do with safety." It's like a person who's been in a dark room their whole life, suddenly let out into the sun. It's not just a physical adjustment, it's a psychological one. You can't rush it. Ethan understood. He and Anya worked together, creating a safe, predictable routine for Raja. Ethan started leaving his coffee cup by the fence, its warmth and familiar scent a constant presence. He started reading to him again, his low murmur a soothing soundtrack to the rustling leaves and the calls of other animals in the sanctuary. Then, on a particularly warm afternoon, something different happened. Ethan was sitting with his back to the fence, reading an old paperback, just as he had for months. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the dusty air of Oklahoma. A sound made him pause. It wasn't a growl, a snarl, or a huff of aggression. It was a soft chuff, a low, gentle exhaling sound that tigers make as a friendly greeting. He slowly turned his head, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Raja was standing a few feet away from the fence, watching him. He wasn't tensed. He wasn't coiled to strike. He was simply watching. His eyes, once a piercing, haunted green, now held a glint of something new, curiosity. Ethan didn't move, not a muscle. He kept his voice low, a soothing hum in the afternoon sun. "Hey, Raja. Good to see you out and about." The tiger took a slow step forward, then another. He approached the fence, his enormous paws silent on the grass. He stopped right where Ethan had been sitting, and with a movement that was both tentative and trusting, he lowered his massive head and rubbed it against the metal bars. It was a gesture of affection, a cat's purr in the form of a physical touch. He didn't growl. He didn't seem afraid. For the first time, he seemed content, a small but undeniable victory. Ethan, in that moment, felt a wave of emotion so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. He had saved a broken body, but in that single, profound moment he realized he had also saved a shattered spirit. A year had passed since Raja's rescue. The seasons had changed. The landscape of the sanctuary had bloomed and wilted and bloomed again. And with them, so had the tiger. He was a different animal entirely. His coat was thick and shiny, a vibrant tapestry of black and orange. His eyes, once haunted, now held a new, calmer depth, a reflection of the peace he had found. He moved with the easy, powerful grace of a true king, his muscles rippling under his pristine fur. He no longer hid in the corner. He spent his days exploring the enclosure, sunbathing on a high rock he had claimed as his own, and swimming in the small stream, his powerful body cutting through the water with effortless ease. Ethan was still at the sanctuary, his temporary role having evolved from rescuer to a permanent caretaker. He and Raja had a silent understanding, a bond forged in mutual respect and trust. Every morning, Ethan would stand by the fence and Raja would come to him. There were no growls, no snarls, just a low purr-like rumble that vibrated through the air, a sound of pure contentment. Ethan would talk to him, telling him about the day, about the new animals, about the simple joy of watching him thrive. One day, while Ethan was watching him from a distance, Raja stretched out on his high rock, a picture of serene power. Dr. Anya Sharma joined him, her expression a mix of professional satisfaction and personal joy. "Look at him," she said softly, a genuine smile on her face. "He's magnificent. He was never the monster they thought he was. He was just a traumatized animal, a victim of circumstance. You didn't just save his life, Ethan. You gave him back his identity." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the tiger. "I know," he said. He watched Raja roll onto his back, exposing his stomach to the sun, a sign of complete trust and contentment that would have been unimaginable a year ago. The tiger that had once growled at everyone now knew peace. His transformation had not only saved his life, but it had also profoundly changed Ethan's. He had come to the rescue weary and cynical, his soul tired from a decade of fighting human cruelty. But in Raja's journey from a broken shadow to a majestic king, Ethan had found a renewed sense of purpose. He had come to understand that his job wasn't about conquering fear, but about nurturing hope. He had given Raja a second chance, and in doing so, had found his own. The final shot is a slow pan out from the sanctuary, leaving Raja to his kingdom. He is no longer a prisoner in a small shed, but a free and majestic tiger. The sound of his low, happy rumble, a testament to the power of compassion and the profound, transformative bond between man and animal. The story ends not with a final act of rescue, but with a quiet, lingering image of peace, a beautiful, powerful creature finally at home in the world.